If you're shopping for a new or certified pre-owned mountain bike, the geometry of your mountain bike has the biggest influence on how it's going to feel and perform. But if you're not familiar with mountain bike geometry, it can be pretty confusing. What do all these numbers mean? Well, I'm going to run down what geometry numbers I pay attention to and how they might affect your ride. Most geometry charts are actually pretty similar, and they're going to provide the same measurements no matter the brand or manufacturer. The measurements that I really pay attention to are stack and reach, head angle and seat angle, wheelbase and chainstay length, BB height or BB drop, and seat tube height. I'm going to explain what each of these is, and then I'm going to cover how they affect how a mountain bike rides and performs. So let's define what all these measurements are. So when we talk about stack and reach, that is the distance from your center of your bottom bracket to the top of your head tube. Your stack is your vertical distance, so like this, from here to where the top of the head tube is, and reach is your horizontal distance from the center of your bottom bracket to the top of your head tube, like this. Now these are important for determining how a bike fits. Certain riders need more stack if they want to sit more upright. Sometimes people like more stack too if they're riding steeper trails and they want to be a little more upright to handle those steeper descents. Reach is important because it determines, sort of how far you need to put your hands out. You need your bike to feel roomy rather than cramped, but if you're too long, you can feel a bit stretched out. Reach also really affects how stable your bike feels. What's been really trendy in recent years is longer and longer reaches because they make bikes feel a lot more stable, especially on fast and steep descents. Now, when we talk about head angle and seat angle, that's the angle essentially of your head tube and your seat tube. So if we look at your head tube and we have a straight line through it like this, that is your head angle. And when people talk about head angle, they'll describe it as slack or steep. Now slack essentially means it's getting more relaxed. It's moving out this way, whereas steep is the opposite and it's getting closer and closer to 90 degrees. Generally, most mountain bikes these days, they sit somewhere between 69 and 62 to 63 degrees, depending on the style of bike. We'll go more into that later, but the slacker your head angle is, the more stable your bike is going to feel, the more confidence-inspiring it's going to be on steep and fast trails. The steeper it is, the more agile your bike is going to feel. It's going to feel easier to turn, especially in tight corners. And also when you're climbing, it's going to feel like it wanders less. So it's, you need less energy to keep the front wheel down and keep things planted when you're going uphill. Now the seat angle, you can see here, this seat angle looks pretty slack, but when we talk about seat angle, usually what we're talking about is what's called virtual seat angle, because on full suspension bikes like this, there's a lot of stuff going on, and the actual seat angle is sometimes different from the angle if you measure it from the center of the bottom bracket to where the saddle is. That's actually what most riders are going to care about, the virtual seat angle here. And again, like head angle, we describe it as either being slack, so more relaxed, or steep. What's gotten really popular in recent years is steeper and steeper seat angles. A lot of riders like them because they sort of put your body more forward on the bike, more over the bottom bracket, which makes it easier to keep the front wheel down and put down the power on steep climbs. But, slack seat angles are fine as long as they're not too slack. A lot of times it depends on sort of your saddle position, what you might prefer. Next, we're going to talk about wheelbase and chainstay length. Now these two are pretty related. Wheelbase obviously is the distance measured from your front axle to your rear axle. That is your wheelbase. Chainstay length is part of that. It's the measurement from the center of your bottom bracket to your rear axle. Now when we talk about these numbers, generally you can say longer means a bike is going to be more stable at high speeds. Shorter means a bike is going to feel more agile and playful. Now, a longer wheelbase, it can be great when you're on steep, fast, gnarly trails, but when you get into tight corners, it can make your bike feel a bit unwieldy. So you definitely need to find the right balance for your local trails. Chainstay length, the trend in recent years has been to go for shorter and shorter chainstay lengths to try and keep bikes feeling agile, playful, easy to lift the front wheel. But a lot of manufacturers now are starting to do size-specific chainstay lengths, because what people have realized is that taller riders, they sometimes need longer chainstays because it helps them feel more centered and balanced on the bike. Bottom bracket height and bottom bracket drop are essentially the same thing, but they're measured a little differently for a very important reason. I'll get into that in a sec. Bottom bracket height is essentially the distance from the center of your bottom bracket here to the ground. And the higher your bottom bracket is, the more agile your bike is gonna feel. And the lower it is, the more stable it's gonna feel. Low bottom brackets have become really common on modern bikes because they make bikes feel so stable, but you get too low and you start to get pedal strikes where you hit rocks, the ground with your pedals, which can be pretty unpleasant. So it's good to find a good balance there. Bottom bracket drop is essentially the same thing, but a lot of manufacturers use that instead of bottom bracket height now, because bottom bracket height can actually change depending on the size of your tire. So a lot of people, when they look at charts, you don't know what tire is on the bike when they measured bottom bracket height. Whereas bottom bracket drop is essentially if you drew a straight line from your axles and measured from that straight line down to your center of your bottom bracket, that's a lot more consistent. So a lot more manufacturers use bottom bracket drop to describe their bottom bracket height. So something to keep in mind. The final thing I pay attention to is your seat tube height. Again, like seat tube angle, it is usually measured from the center of the bottom bracket to the top of your seat tube, like this. So on a full suspension bike like this, it's not this length here, it's actually this length here. Now this isn't that important on modern mountain bikes when it comes to sizing a bike, because they're getting smaller and smaller, but the important part with seat tube length is it determines how large of a dropper post you can run. So if you're trying to fit the longest dropper post possible, you need to make sure that it fits in the seat tube of the bike you're looking at and that there's enough insertion in the bike you're looking at to work with the dropper length that you're interested in running. So now that we know what the important geometry numbers are and how they affect how a bike rides and performs, what do we do with this information? Well, if you're a new rider, it gives you like a basic idea of what you might want in a bike. For example, if you care about climbing, if you're riding less technical trails that are tighter, maybe flowy, then maybe you want a bike with a steeper head angle and shorter reach because it'll feel more agile, something like a cross-country bike. But if you're riding trails that are steeper, gnarlier, and more terrifying, maybe you want longer reach and slacker head angles like you find on an enduro bike. Maybe you want something in the middle, like a trail bike. But geometry is most useful when you have a point of reference, as in a bike that you already own, that you're familiar with, that you know the geometry of, and you can compare it to another bike that you might be interested in. For example, if your current bike feels a little sketchy when you're descending, maybe look for something slacker, look for something longer. If your bike feels a little slow, like a pig in the tight corners, if it feels a little wandery on climbs, maybe you need something shorter and steeper. Geometry is really personal preference, so you might have to try a lot of bikes to find out what really works for you and what you really like. Also, if you want to compare geometry, one of my favorite tools is Geometry Geeks. It's a free website that lets you compare bikes and sort of figure out how they differ in certain measurements. Hopefully this has helped you decode geometry charts. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe. We'll see you next time.